He didn't come back. I stood there in a silver dress, smiling for no one. Then a stranger crossed the room toward me. "You look like you need a friend," she said. I didn't know her name yet. By midnight, she knew mine better than my fiancé ever had. What she told me 3 weeks later changed everything. My name is Maya Whitfield, 29 years old, a graphic designer living in Portland, Oregon. Engaged to a man my family adored. I had spent my whole life building a version of myself that everyone else could love, except the real one hiding underneath. The night of my company's holiday gala was supposed to be simple. Smile, dance with Daniel, let my parents believe their daughter had finally settled into the life they'd always planned for her. Daniel canceled an hour before the party, texting only something came up. "Go without me." I stared at the message under fluorescent bathroom light, mascara already smudging, wondering how many more nights would end this way. I walked into the ballroom alone, gripping a clutch too small to hide how much my hands were shaking. Every table felt like a spotlight aimed directly at my empty seat beside it. My coworkers waved politely, then returned to their spouses, their easy laughter a language I'd forgotten how to speak. I found a corner near the bar and ordered a drink I didn't want. That's when she appeared. Camera slung over one shoulder. Dressed simply in black. "You look like you need a friend," she said. And something in her voice made the room feel smaller, safer. Her name was Sloane Carter, hired to photograph the event for the marketing team. She wasn't a guest, just someone doing a job. Yet she stayed beside me the rest of the night. We talked about nothing important, the terrible shrimp cocktail, the DJ's questionable playlist, the way corporate parties always smelled like candle wax and desperation. I laughed for the first time in weeks. When the party ended, she walked me to my car instead of packing up her equipment first. "Get home safe." "Maya," she said, and my name sounded different in her mouth than in anyone else's. I didn't tell Daniel about her. There was nothing to tell. I reasoned. Just a kind stranger who noticed I was drowning. I thought about her voice the entire drive home. 3 days later, an email arrived from the event's coordinator with photo proofs attached. Buried among them was one Sloane must have taken herself. Me laughing. Alone. Radiant in a way I hadn't recognized. I emailed her to say thank you. She replied within the hour, asking if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. No camera. No work talk. Just conversation. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. We met at a small shop near the Willamette River. She ordered black coffee. I ordered something absurdly sweet. She teased me about it, and I felt absurdly like I was finally being seen. I didn't know yet that this coffee would become a habit, then a Tuesday tradition, then the only part of my week I actually looked forward to living through. Our Tuesdays became sacred. Sloane would show me photos from her freelance shoots, weddings, protests, quiet street scenes, and I realized she saw beauty in things I usually rushed past without noticing. "You have good eyes," she told me once, studying a sketch I doodled on a napkin. No one had called any part of me good in a long time. I saved that napkin anyway. Daniel noticed I was happier, but assumed it was wedding planning. He'd smile absently and say, "That's great, babe," already scrolling his phone, already somewhere else entirely. Even when sitting beside me, I started noticing small things about Sloane. The chip in her front tooth when she laughed too hard. The way she always let strangers cut in line without complaint. Her stubborn kindness. One Tuesday she showed up late, eyes red, and admitted her grandmother had passed away that morning. I canceled my afternoon meetings and simply sat with her until the sun went down. "You didn't have to stay," she said quietly. "I wanted to," I answered, and meant it more than I'd meant most things I'd said to Daniel in the past 2 years. She started texting me photos throughout the day. A weird cloud shape, a dog wearing sunglasses, graffiti that looked like a smiling face. Small proof that she was thinking of me. Unprompted, I found myself checking my phone constantly. disappointed when hours passed without her name appearing. I told myself this was simply friendship, the kind I'd never allowed myself to have before. Daniel proposed a wedding date over dinner, casually, between bites of pasta, as if selecting a date for a dentist appointment. I said yes because saying no felt impossible, unthinkable, dangerous. That night I texted Sloane instead of calling my mother first. She replied immediately, "Congratulations." I guess. The question mark sat there on my screen like an accusation I couldn't answer. We met the next day, and she apologized for the strange text. "I just don't understand why you don't seem happy," she said carefully, watching my face for something I wasn't ready to give. I changed the subject, but the conversation followed me home, into my sleep, into the shower where I finally let myself cry about something I couldn't yet name out loud. Sloane started inviting me to things beyond coffee, gallery openings, a friend's poetry reading, a Sunday farmer's market where she knew every vendor by first name and life story. I found reasons to say yes to all of it, telling Daniel I was networking or de-stressing. Small lies stacking quietly like bricks I didn't yet realize I was building a wall from. At the gallery opening, she introduced me to her friend Priya as my favorite Tuesday person, and something in my chest ached pleasantly at being anyone's favorite anything. We stood in front of a painting of two women reaching toward each other across a canyon, neither quite touching. "That's kind of devastating," I said. "Or hopeful," Sloane countered. "Depends how you look at it." Walking to my car afterward, our hands brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately, and the silence between us felt louder than any conversation we'd ever had before. "I should go," I said finally, though my feet didn't move. "You should," she agreed, not moving either, until a passing car's headlights broke whatever spell had settled over the parking lot. I drove home rattled, replaying that half-second of contact for hours. Daniel was already asleep when I got in, and I lay beside him feeling like a stranger in my own bed. The next Tuesday, I almost canceled coffee 3 separate times. Curiosity beat caution, and I showed up anyway, heart hammering against a truth I still refused to name directly. Sloane looked nervous too, fidgeting with her cup. "I need to say something, and you can tell me I'm wrong," she started. "I think I'm falling for you, Maya." "I think I have been for weeks." I didn't answer with words. I answered by not leaving, by staying in that booth long after our coffee went cold, letting the truth sit between us like something finally allowed to breathe. "I'm engaged," I whispered eventually, as if she didn't already know, as if saying it might undo whatever had just cracked open inside my chest. "I know," she said gently. "I'm not asking you to choose right now. I just needed you to know how I feel, even if nothing changes." Her honesty terrified and steadied me at once. I went home that night and looked at Daniel differently, searching his familiar face for a version of feeling I now understood I had never actually possessed for him. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., phone in hand, typing and deleting messages to Sloane until my thumbs ached from indecision and fear. The following week I told Daniel I needed space to think about the wedding, blaming stress at work. He looked relieved more than hurt, which told me something I'd been avoiding for years. Sloane and I kept meeting, but everything felt charged now. Every glance loaded with a question neither of us was brave enough yet to fully ask. One rainy afternoon, stuck under her umbrella waiting out a downpour, she finally asked, "Do you feel it too? Or am I imagining this?" I answered by kissing her before I lost my nerve. The kiss was soft, brief, and terrifying in how right it felt, like discovering a language I'd been mute in my entire life without knowing it existed. We pulled apart, both breathless, both scared. "I can't do this to Daniel," I said, though my body was already leaning back toward her, contradicting every word coming out of my mouth. "Then we won't do anything," she said, stepping back despite the rain. "But I'm not sorry it happened, Maya. I'm just sorry about the timing." Her restraint hurt more than any pressure could have. I broke things off with Daniel 2 days later, unable to look him in the eye while planning a wedding I no longer believed in. I didn't mention Sloane's name once. He wasn't devastated the way I expected. "I've felt you pulling away for months," he admitted quietly. And for a second, I wondered exactly how much he'd already known. My mother, Diane, called the moment she heard, voice tight with disappointment disguised as concern. "What will people think?" Maya. The Hendersons already sent save the dates. Her priorities exposed themselves instantly, painfully clear. I didn't tell her about Sloane yet. I wasn't even sure what to call what was happening between us, only that it felt more honest than anything I'd built with Daniel. Sloane and I took things slowly at first. Careful. Tentative. Like two people handling something fragile they were terrified of breaking through carelessness or fear. Our first real date felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. We walked along the waterfront until midnight, talking about childhoods, fear, the families who'd shaped and sometimes wounded us. She told me about growing up in rural Idaho, how her father stopped speaking to her the day she came out at 19, how she'd built a chosen family in Portland instead. I told her about Grandma Ruth, 91 years old, sharp-tongued, the family matriarch everyone feared disappointing more than they feared disappointing God himself. "She'll never accept this," I said, meaning myself, meaning Sloane, meaning the whole shape of who I was becoming. Sloane just squeezed my hand and said, "One battle at a time." We became inseparable over the following month, meeting whenever schedules allowed, texting constantly in between, building a private world made entirely of small, ordinary happiness. My friends noticed the change first, the lightness in my voice, the phone I now protected like something precious. "You seem different," my coworker Priya observed. I just smiled and changed the subject. Sloane took me to meet her chosen family. A loud, warm group of people who'd built their own definition of home after their biological families had failed them. "They're your people now too, if you want them," Sloane said afterward. And I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight since childhood. Some old fear finally starting to release. I started imagining a future for the first time in years. Not the one my parents had scripted, but something messier, riskier, entirely my own to shape and claim. One evening, cooking dinner in her small apartment, Sloane looked at me across the stove and said, "I love you, Maya." I said it back without hesitation, surprising us both with how easy it felt. We didn't rush toward labels or plans. We simply existed together, learning each other's rhythms, discovering how comfortable silence could feel when shared with the right person. But happiness this new always felt borrowed to me, like something I hadn't yet earned the right to keep, something that could be taken back the moment someone important found out. I was right to worry. My mother found a photo on my phone while borrowing it to call a plumber, and the peaceful life I'd built began collapsing before I could protect it. "Who is this woman?" Diane demanded, phone screen glowing between us like evidence at a trial. I could have lied. Instead, exhausted from years of hiding, I told her the truth. Her face went through disbelief, then horror, then something colder I'd never seen directed at me before. "This is not who we raised," she said, voice shaking with betrayal. "This is exactly who you raised," I answered, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I just finally stopped pretending otherwise for your comfort." The words felt like stepping off a cliff. She left without another word. And within hours my father called, voice grave, asking if this was a phase or something requiring professional help. I hung up before I said something unforgivable. Grandma Ruth called next, and I braced for the worst, certain her disapproval would be the final blow. I couldn't survive on top of everything else collapsing around me. Instead, her voice was quieter than usual. "Come see me Sunday." "Alone," she said, offering no judgment, no anger. Just an instruction I couldn't decipher through the phone line. I told Sloane everything that night. crying in her arms. Terrified I just detonated my entire family for a relationship still barely 2 months old. You didn't detonate anything, she said firmly. You just stopped absorbing the damage of pretending. There's a difference. Even if it doesn't feel like one right now. I wanted desperately to believe her. Sunday arrived too quickly. I drove to Grandma Ruth's house with my hands trembling on the wheel, rehearsing explanations I doubted would matter to a woman of her generation. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulled me inside, and sat me at her kitchen table beneath the same yellowed photographs that had watched over my entire childhood. Your mother told me, she said simply, pouring 2 cups of tea with hands that shook slightly from age. I need to tell you something I've never told anyone in this family. From a locked drawer, she produced a small bundle of letters, paper yellowed and soft with age, tied together with faded ribbon that had clearly been untouched for decades. Her name was Eleanor, Grandma Ruth said, voice cracking. We were together for 3 years in the 1950s, before I married your grandfather because I had no other choice available to me. I sat frozen, staring at my grandmother in a way I never had before, seeing an entire hidden lifetime folded inside a woman I'd only ever known as rigid and traditional. I let fear decide my life, she said, gripping my hand tighter than I thought her capable of. I will not let fear decide yours too, Maya. Not while I'm still breathing. I cried harder in that kitchen than I had in years, grieving a version of my grandmother's happiness that had been stolen, while somehow gaining permission for my own. Your mother will come around. Or she won't, Ruth said. But you tell that girl of yours she's welcome in this house anytime. I mean that with everything I have left. I left her house lighter than I'd arrived, carrying both grief for what she'd lost and a fragile new hope for what I might still get to keep. Not everyone softened as quickly. My mother avoided my calls for 2 weeks straight, and my father sent one stiff email suggesting we revisit this conversation later. Once emotions settle. Sloan never pushed me to force reconciliation faster than I could manage. Grief has its own timeline, she said. Let your family move at whatever pace keeps them from breaking completely. Work complicated things further when Daniel's sister, Kate, turned out to be a senior partner at the marketing firm handling our biggest client account that quarter. She'd heard about the breakup from Daniel and made her disapproval known through pointed comments in meetings, small professional slights that felt personal disguised as business as usual. I need this account, I told Sloan one night, stress finally cracking my composure. If Kate decides to make my life difficult here, I could actually lose my job over this. Sloan offered to talk to Kate, whom she apparently knew slightly through mutual photography connections, but I refused, terrified of making an already fragile situation somehow catastrophically worse. The pressure mounted at work while my family remained distant, and for the first time since meeting Sloan, I started questioning whether happiness this costly was actually worth what it demanded. Maybe I should have just married him, I said one exhausted evening, immediately regretting the words as they left my mouth and landed heavily between us. Sloan's face crumpled briefly before she composed herself. If that's really what you think, I need you to say it clearly, not throw it at me during a bad week. I apologized instantly, horrified at myself, but the damage lingered in the air between us like smoke that wouldn't clear no matter how hard we tried to ventilate it. We had our first real fight that night. Voices raised, old fears surfacing on both sides, her fear of being someone's temporary rebellion, mine of losing everything familiar forever. I've done this before, she admitted finally, tears in her eyes. Loved someone who chose their family's comfort over me. I can't survive watching that happen twice. Maya. I won't survive it. I didn't know about her past relationship, and the revelation stopped my anger cold, replaced instantly by a need to understand what had shaped her fear so deeply. Her name was Jess, Sloan explained quietly. We were together 4 years. 2 weeks before our commitment ceremony, she left me for a man her parents approved of instead. I'm not her, I said, reaching for Sloan's hand. I know, she whispered back, But sometimes my body forgets that before my brain catches up to remind it. We talked until 3 a.m. that night, unpacking every fear, every insecurity, choosing honesty over comfortable silence for the first time since our relationship began. By morning, something between us felt sturdier, tested and proven rather than simply assumed, like a bridge that had survived its first real storm intact. Work stress didn't disappear, but I stopped hiding it from Sloane, and she stopped assuming every hard day meant I regretted choosing her over the life I'd left behind. My mother finally called, voice careful, asking if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us. No arguing. I promise. I agreed, cautiously hopeful, bracing for anything. She arrived looking older than I remembered, hands wrapped tightly around her cup. I talked to your grandmother, she admitted. She told me about Eleanor. I never knew that about her. It changed how I'm thinking about things, my mother continued carefully. I'm not saying I understand everything yet, but I'm trying. Maya, I need you to know I'm trying. It wasn't the full acceptance I'd once dreamed of, but it was a door cracked open instead of slammed shut. And for now, that felt like enough to hold on to. I told her about Sloane properly this time, her work, her kindness, the way she made me feel like myself for the first time in my adult life. My mother listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she simply said, I'd like to meet her sometime, when you're both ready. Small words carrying enormous, unexpected weight. I called Sloane immediately after, crying happy tears in my car. She wants to meet you, I said. Sloane went quiet for a moment before whispering, that's terrifying and wonderful. We agreed to dinner 3 weeks out, giving everyone time to prepare, myself included, for a meeting I both desperately wanted and quietly dreaded in equal measure. Meanwhile, the situation at work escalated when Kate scheduled a client meeting deliberately excluding me. A clear message about where our firm's loyalties currently stood. I confronted her directly, professional but firm. Whatever issue you have with my personal life, keep it out of this office, I said, surprising myself with newfound courage. Kate's expression flickered, something almost like respect crossing her face. Daniel's still hurting, she said quietly. But you're right. This isn't the place for it. She reinstated me on the account that afternoon. Small victories accumulated slowly, proving that standing firm didn't always end in disaster, that sometimes honesty actually earned respect rather than destroying everything I'd worked to build. The dinner with my mother finally arrived, and I watched her shake Sloane's hand with visible effort, old habits of judgment fighting against her stated desire to change. Conversation was stiff at first, then slowly warmed as Sloane asked about my mother's garden, her volunteer work. Small details that showed she'd actually listened during our earlier conversations about her. By dessert, my mother was laughing at one of Sloane's stories, and something in my chest finally released a tension I'd been carrying since childhood without realizing its full weight. She's lovely, Maya, my mother admitted afterward, walking me to my car. I still have things to work through, but I can see why you love her. Progress, however imperfect, felt monumental. Grandma Ruth insisted on hosting Thanksgiving that year, announcing plainly that Sloane was invited and expected. No exceptions negotiable regardless of anyone else's discomfort about the arrangement. My father struggled visibly through the holiday, polite but distant, clearly still processing a reality he hadn't chosen and didn't fully understand yet. But he didn't leave. And he didn't cause a scene. He'll come around slower than your mother, Grandma Ruth murmured to me in the kitchen. Men his age need longer to unlearn what they were taught was unquestionable truth. I appreciated her honesty more than false promises of quick acceptance, understanding that healing family wounds this old would require patience I hadn't previously known I possessed. Sloane fit into the chaos of my extended family better than I expected, trading recipes with my aunt, discussing football with my cousins, existing simply as herself without apology. Watching her move comfortably through my complicated family, I felt something settle permanently into place. A certainty that this relationship was worth every difficult conversation it had required. Just when things felt stable, Sloane received a phone call that changed her expression instantly, color draining from her face as she stepped outside to take it privately. She returned 20 minutes later. Quiet. Distracted. Refusing to explain what had happened until we were alone driving home later that night through empty city streets. "That was Jess," she finally said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "She's getting divorced. She wants to meet. Says she made a huge mistake she's spent years regretting." My stomach dropped. Old insecurities flaring instantly. "Are you going to see her?" asked, trying to keep panic out of my voice and failing considerably. "I don't know yet," Sloane admitted honestly. "I need to process this before I decide anything. Please don't make me choose right now." "Maya, I can't think clearly enough for that." The next week passed in tense silence between us, both avoiding the topic, both aware it was growing larger the longer we refused to properly address it together. I found myself spiraling, imagining Sloane returning to her first love, imagining myself becoming a mere footnote in someone else's more permanent, more important story. "I need to see her. Just once. For closure," Sloane finally said. "Not to get back together. To finally close a door I've kept open for 4 years without realizing it." I agreed, though every instinct screamed against it, understanding that trust meant allowing space for things that frightened me if I truly wanted this relationship built on honesty. The meeting happened at a coffee shop, brief and controlled according to Sloane's account afterward. Jess had apologized, cried, admitted her marriage had been a mistake born entirely from fear. "I told her I'd already found something better," Sloane said, taking my hands in hers. "Something I'm not willing to lose for anyone's second chances at doing things right." Relief flooded through me, but a small residual fear lingered anyway, a reminder that love, however strong, still required constant choosing rather than one-time proof. We used the scare to strengthen things instead of weakening them, talking openly about insecurities we'd both been quietly nursing since the conversation about Jess first began. "I want this to last," Sloane said one evening, watching the sunset from her apartment balcony. "Not because it's easy, but because you're worth the difficulty every single time." I believed her completely, understanding now that real love wasn't the absence of complication, but the choice to remain anyway, through every complication that inevitably arrived uninvited. 6 months into our relationship, Sloane received an incredible job offer, lead photographer for a major publication, based in New York City, far from everything we built together. "It's an amazing opportunity," she said carefully, watching my reaction. "But I won't take it if it means losing you. I need you to be honest about what you're thinking." I didn't know what to say immediately, torn between supporting her dreams and terrified of a long-distance relationship, threatening everything we'd fought so hard to establish. "Take it," I finally said, surprising myself. "I'll figure out remote work. Or we'll figure out something else entirely. I refuse to be the reason you shrink your own future." We spent weeks researching options, discovering my design job actually offered remote flexibility I hadn't previously considered pursuing, opening a possibility neither of us had initially believed available. The plan solidified slowly. Sloane would move first, establish herself, and I would follow 3 months later once my current projects finished and my lease expired properly. Telling my family about the move triggered fresh tension. My mother worried about losing me completely, my father silently disapproving of a decision he still didn't fully understand. "You just got us back," my mother said, voice breaking slightly. "New York feels so far away. Maya, I'm scared I'll lose the progress we've only just started making together." "You won't lose me," I promised. "Distance doesn't erase what we've built here. I'll visit constantly, and you're welcome in New York anytime you want to see how I'm doing." Grandma Ruth surprised everyone by declaring she'd always wanted to see New York properly. insisting we plan a visit together once we were settled into our new apartment. Sloan moved first, and the 3 months apart tested us more than I anticipated. Video calls replacing physical presence. Longing becoming a constant undercurrent beneath daily routine. I miss the small things, she admitted during one call, exhausted from her demanding new job. Your laugh. The way you steal my coffee. Just having you physically nearby. I counted down days obsessively, packing boxes early, finalizing arrangements, desperate to close the distance that had begun feeling unbearably long despite being temporary by design. 2 weeks before my planned move, disaster struck. My design firm announced sudden layoffs, and my position, along with several others, was eliminated without significant warning provided. Panic set in immediately. Financial security suddenly uncertain right as I prepared to relocate to one of the most expensive cities in the entire country. We'll figure it out together, Sloan said firmly over the phone, refusing to let my fear derail plans we'd both invested months of hope and effort building carefully. I updated my portfolio frantically, applying to remote positions across multiple industries, refusing to let unemployment become the excuse that finally separated us permanently after everything survived already. 3 days before my move date, I received an offer from a design agency specializing in nonprofit branding, salary lower than before but stable, meaningful work aligned with values I actually held. I accepted immediately, relief washing over me as one more obstacle cleared unexpectedly from a path that had felt increasingly uncertain throughout the entire transition process. The moving truck arrived on schedule, my entire Portland life compressed into boxes labeled in Sloan's handwriting from her earlier visit, helping me methodically pack everything up. Driving across the country alone, I had hours to reflect on everything that had changed since that lonely night standing abandoned at a corporate holiday party months earlier. I arrived in New York exhausted but electric with anticipation, and Sloan was waiting outside our new building, exactly like she'd promised she would be there. She decorated our new apartment with small touches from Portland, a photo from our first coffee date, the napkin sketch I'd once left behind, carefully preserved and framed properly. Welcome home, she said, and I finally understood that home wasn't a location I'd been searching for, but a person who made anywhere feel entirely, completely safe. We settled into New York life gradually, building new routines while maintaining old traditions, our relationship stronger for having survived distance without losing its essential closeness. 6 weeks after my arrival, everything felt stable enough that we allowed ourselves to relax, believing perhaps the hardest obstacles were finally behind us for good. That's when Jess resurfaced again. This time not by phone but in person, having also relocated to New York for her own newly finalized post-divorce fresh start. She appeared at Sloan's workplace unannounced, requesting to reconnect as friends, claiming she wanted closure and community in a city where she knew almost no one else. Sloan told her clearly there was no path back to romance, but agreed cautiously to occasional friendly coffee, wanting to model the kind of grace she wished she'd received. I trusted Sloan's judgment, but old insecurities occasionally resurfaced anyway, especially on nights she came home later than expected from these supposedly platonic meetings. I need you to trust me, Sloan said one evening, noticing my quiet tension. Or tell me clearly if you can't, because I won't keep doing this if it's hurting you secretly. I admitted my fear honestly instead of suppressing it. I trust you, I said. I just don't fully trust that she's actually over wanting you back completely. Sloan promised to set clearer boundaries, and true to her word, the meetings became less frequent, eventually stopping altogether once Jess found her own new community elsewhere in the city. The scare, though painful, taught us something valuable, that voicing fear directly prevented it from festering silently into resentment neither of us actually wanted to carry. Around this time, my father finally called unprompted, voice hesitant but genuine. I've been reading things, he admitted awkwardly, trying to understand better. I'm sorry it's taken this long. I cried after that call, years of quiet hurt finally beginning to soften into something resembling healing. Imperfect but real. Offered without me having to demand it. Kate, of all people, reached out too. Apologizing for her earlier behavior at work. Daniel's doing better, she wrote. He's actually dating someone new. I hope you're doing well too. Maya. I responded kindly, genuinely wishing Daniel happiness, understanding now that our relationship had never been right for either of us. Regardless of how it had originally ended, life in New York found its rhythm eventually, my nonprofit work fulfilling, Sloane's photography career flourishing, our relationship the steady center holding everything else comfortably together. 1 year after that lonely holiday party, Sloane suggested we return to Portland to celebrate the anniversary properly, visiting family and revisiting the coffee shop where everything had actually begun. Grandma Ruth, now 92, insisted on joining us at the coffee shop despite her family's gentle protests about her mobility and the distance involved in the outing. I want to see where it started, she said firmly. Some things deserve witnessing properly. Maya. Eleanor never got that chance. I intend to have it, at least once, for both of us. Sitting in that same booth, 1 year later, surrounded by family who had traveled genuine distance both literally and emotionally, I felt overwhelming gratitude for how far everyone had come. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Words I'd once believed I would never actually hear from her. Proud of both of you, she added, looking at Sloane with something approaching genuine warmth. You make my daughter happier than I've ever seen her in her entire life. Sloane's eyes welled up, and I realized this acceptance meant as much to her as it did to me. Healing an old wound from her own complicated family history too. That evening, walking along the same waterfront from our early dates, Sloane suddenly stopped walking and turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite immediately read. I've been carrying something for months, she said, pulling a small box from her coat pocket, hands trembling slightly despite her usual steady composure and confidence. Maya Whitfield, you found me on the worst night of your life, and somehow became the best thing in mine. Will you build the rest of it with me? I said yes before she even finished the question, tears streaming freely. The entire coffee shop's patrons applauding as strangers witnessed a moment I'd once believed impossible for myself. Grandma Ruth clapped loudest of all, joy radiating from her weathered face. Decades of quiet grief finally transformed into something resembling triumphant, hard-won celebration. Eleanor would have loved this, she whispered to me later, pressing the old ribbon-tied letters into my hands. Keep these safe. Let our story finish properly through yours instead. We planned a small wedding for the following spring. Intentionally simple. Focused on the people who had actually shown up rather than performing for those who hadn't. My father walked me down a short aisle in my parents' backyard. Garden roses blooming exactly as my mother had promised they would that particular season. Daniel, unexpectedly, sent a card wishing us happiness. No bitterness detectable in his handwriting. Only genuine relief that we both eventually found relationships suited to who we actually were. Kate attended as a guest, bringing a +1 who turned out to be a woman, quietly revealing her own hidden truth in a family finally learning to make more room. Grandma Ruth read a short passage from one of Eleanor's old letters during the ceremony, voice steady despite obvious emotion, honoring a love denied its proper chance decades earlier. Live loudly, the letter read, for both of us, and for everyone still too afraid. The backyard fell completely silent, then erupted into tears and applause simultaneously. Sloane and I exchanged vows we'd written separately, promising honesty, patience, and continued choosing each other through whatever difficulties still waited somewhere further down our shared road. I thought about the party where we'd first met, how abandonment that night had actually been the universe redirecting me towards something infinitely more real and lasting. My mother hugged Sloane longer than protocol required, whispering something private that made them both laugh through visible tears, an image I never expected to witness happen. We danced our first dance to a song Sloan had once played during our earliest Tuesday coffee dates. Full circle. Complete. Exactly as it was always meant to become. Grandma Ruth passed peacefully 8 months later. Eleanor's letters buried with her at her explicit request. Finally reunited in whatever way remained possible after so many decades apart. At her funeral, I stood surrounded by family who had learned to love me completely. Holding my wife's hand, understanding fully what my grandmother's courage had ultimately purchased for us all. I was once left alone at a party, invisible and unwanted, certain no one would ever choose me fully or completely. Instead, someone did. And everything after became worth the wait. We built a life neither of us thought possible that lonely December night. Proof that sometimes the person who simply notices you is the one meant to stay forever. Fendi.